We're live on Proline TV, the Our Football Network, talking college football. Matter of fact, we're talking some Big 12 college football, and specifically the BYU Cougars, who had themselves a fun ride last year, undefeated for most of the season, just a few plays away from being undefeated. And I had the really awesome time talking to this gentleman here, Jake Hatch. I wanted to find out what the heck was going on with BYU, and Jake did a great job filling me in. And so it's awesome to have him back as we start the 2025 season. Jake, thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
All right, Jake. So again, a lot of positives came out of last season, no doubt. But as you know, this is football, new year, especially college, with all the changes going on. But there's one team that actually has been making a little bit of noise, and when it's really dead at this time of year, it's always bad news, you know, the noise that comes out. But BYU just happens to be one of those teams because of Rhett Laff, their quarterback. And I'm not going to say it's like, you know, majorly bad news. It's just the fact that it's news, and have a quarterback that was riding an undefeated team in a Big 12 conference that is now gone, and a little story behind it. That had to be a big blow. How's that going right now? Because, you know, we're still getting ready for camp, a lot of time for these kids to prepare to take over. But was it a big blow or a little overrated as far as the loss?
You don't lose a starting quarterback that led you to an 11-2 campaign and not take a hit. There's just no doubt about that. Now, BYU, as I've said often on my podcast and other appearances I've made recently, is last year BYU is the sum total of its parts. Defense was elite. Special teams was absolutely incredible. And the offense was very, very good in many circumstances as well. But it seemed like every phase of football helped BYU win. And it wasn't just Jake Retzloff leading them to that incredible campaign. So, yeah, while I do think that they'd take a blow with him no longer being with the program, looking for a new program to call home, I do expect that BYU will hope that one of the three guys I expect to contend for that job will be able to step up and help the thing keep rolling here.
And how long have they known that this was on the table, that they knew they were going to have to prepare for life without Retzlaff?
I think when that lawsuit that alleged sexual assault, was a civil lawsuit that, for those of your listeners and viewers who don't know this, was a civil lawsuit filed against Jake Retzlaff that alleged a sexual assault back in 2023. It was filed in May. And I think at that point, BYU, just with regard to the honor code that prohibits premarital sexual relations with anybody, I think that BYU at that point said, you know what, it's probably best that we probably start thinking about our future at that position. So they probably had a couple of months now lead time to really get ready for this. But Retzlaff is now formally withdrawing from school. He'll be obviously looking for a new program, and they now are fully intent on having a quarterback battle in training camp upcoming at the end of this month when it begins.
All right, before we get into that battle and the rest of the depth chart, let's start with the coaching staff, because as you mentioned, and then we talked about it last year, this is, you know, one of the more underrated coaching staffs in college football. I mean, this is a really good staff, and it shows you how important that was, and why maybe not a surprise that they were that good last year, because, you know, average to below average coaching staffs aren't going to get that type of production out of a Big 12 team. So, talk about this staff, because the top guys are still there.
Yeah, so Kalani Sitake is entering his 10th year as the head coach, but as you mentioned, he's got a really, really elite staff around him. Defensive coordinator Jay Hill is the associate head coach as well. He's done an incredible job transforming BYU's defense over the past 2 years. They were top 40 or top 30 in most metrics last year, and the expectation will take another leap forward this year on defense. Aaron Roderick is back once again as offensive coordinator, and you don't go 11-2 without having a pretty good offense, and he coordinated that last year. And then I also got to give props to special teams coordinator Kelly Papinga. He generated an All-American kick returner in Keelan Marion, obviously had an incredible punt returner in Parker Kingston, and their place kicker, Will Farron, seemingly came out of nowhere and had an incredible season in his own right. So the nice part is he's got all three of those coordinators back. In fact, his entire staff, there's not a person outside of a graduate assistant or two that is not back from last year's staff. And when you have a season as successful as BYU did, you would have expected some attrition. But Kalani's got his guys. They're devoted to working with him. They enjoy being in the environment that BYU provides. And the nice part is BYU's also ponying up when it comes to the funds to retain staff, because a lot of it comes down to dollars and cents. How much can you pay me? And BYU's been lucky enough after an 11-2 campaign to retain their entire coaching staff, which should absolutely breed some continuity going into this year.
Which of those assistants do you think has the biggest upside? Who do you think is going to get poached first?
Easily Jay Hill. He was a head coach at Weber State, took Weber State from a just down in the dumps FCS program and made them an annual FCS playoff, if not championship contender during his time up there in Ogden, which is about 2 hours north of Provo. And I expect that he will be a head coach at the Power 4 level in due time. That's the reason why he made the leap from being a head coach at the FCS level to being the defensive coordinator and associate head coach at BYU, is because he wants to be a head coach at this level. And as he continues to coordinate the defense that he's been coordinating the last 2 years, programs are going to take notice of that, and they will pick it up at some point. I also think that you could look at some other assistants like a Kelly Papinga, maybe a Gennaro Guilford. They could be guys that are in line for elevations to coordinator status. I know that Kelly's got the special teams coordinator title, but could be a defensive coordinator option down the line as well. So there are a bunch of guys that I think will get attention when it comes to that. It's kind of what they're looking for in their careers. But I think the brightest in terms of a candidate to take another job is absolutely Jay Hill.
Papinga, is he a former Cougar?
He is a former Cougar. Okay. His older brother, Brady, if any of you might recall, played for the Green Bay Packers, won a Super Bowl with Green Bay. That family is all football all the time.
Yeah.
He also coaches the defensive ends, or they call them edges at BYU, and does an incredible job with that in addition to what he's doing at the special teams.
All right. So let's talk now about spring, and maybe this goes in part to the quarterback position. I think that's pretty easy to detect there. So what was first of all, what would you think was the biggest news coming out of the spring outside of Retzlaff? I mean, good. Could be a quarterback on the rise, but any particular player or position? What news stood out this spring?
The biggest thing from spring was retooling the offensive line. They lost a bunch of guys from from last year's squad to the NFL, guys like Connor Pay. You also saw guys come into the program via the transfer portal at that position, and they needed to retool it. So they obviously were trying to get the guys on the same page when it came to the offensive front. Defensively, I thought similar to the offensive line, the defensive line was a big storyline. All four of their starters, or I guess their main starters from last year's defensive line, all departed the program, whether it was a graduation or the NFL, and they had to retool that. They obviously brought guys in like Keanu Tanuvasa, who transferred from Utah to BYU and made waves, because you don't do that in this rivalry very often. So they brought him in, and they're expecting their defensive line to take another step forward. And they expected coming out of spring, at least they thought that they were going to be better on that defensive front. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that BYU had a ton of production from last year's squad outside of the trench play coming back. And the biggest thing coming out of spring was to make sure those guys just stayed sharp, because they expect to have a lot of continuity, and they hoped it would carry over even after finishing spring ball, thinking that Jake Retzlaff was going to be your QB and not having him now as you head into training camp.
Okay, so then let's get right into that quarterback spot from spring, or just in general. So has anybody stood out? Is this wide open? Is it truly wide open? Is there a 2 or 3 man camp battle that we're going to see? What's your guess? What are you hearing?
Now, Kalani Sitake was at Big 12 Media Days, and I was there in Frisco earlier this week, and he said it's a 4-man battle. I don't believe that for a second. It's a 3-man battle, because the fourth man is a true freshman quarterback coming in from a high school here in Utah. Good prospect, but he is only 18 years old. So I'm gonna discount that side of it. But there are 3 main contenders at that quarterback spot. 2 of them were in the program the past year. They are McKay Hillstead as well as Trayson Bourget. Both of them have Division I starting experience. Bourget started at Western Michigan across 2 seasons before transferring to BYU, and then Hillstead, who's a former prep star here in the state of Utah, he had some starts under his belt at Utah State before transferring to BYU. So they're not they're not looking at a position group that has no experience. Those two do have Division I experience, albeit at the G6 level. They have never started a game or played at the Power 4 level. And then the big name that came in via the transfer portal this year was Bear Bachmeyer, a 4-star prospect, enrolled at Stanford early, went through 2 or 3 weeks of spring camp with the Cardinal. Then the Troy Taylor situation went down where he was fired. Bear decided he didn't want to stick around, transferred. BYU picks him up, and they fully expect if he can get up to speed, he will absolutely be in the mix in that 3-way battle come training camp to see who's going to emerge as the starting quarterback. But your question was, do I think it's open? Yeah, I absolutely think that all 3 of these guys are viable contenders, and to the Victor go the spoils when it comes to that.
And so basically there are 2 true freshmen. One of them is just way too young, but Bear is the one true freshman that does have a legitimate shot to win in the job.
Yeah, the thing with Bear is he's already 6'2", 225 pounds. He's got a fully, you look at Division I quarterback body. That's what's going to give him the leg up over a guy like Emerson Geilman, the other freshman I mentioned.
Give me a gut feeling prediction on who you think is going to win the job.
Right now, I would say McKay Hillstead will get the nod. I think his dual threat ability, albeit he's pretty short. He's listed at 5'10", but I think he's got elite, legit track speed as a dual threat quarterback. And Aaron Roderick's offense thrives when they have a dual threat quarterback of his caliber. So if you were to ask me if they're going to start a game tomorrow, I think McKay Hillstead's getting the nod.
All right. Awesome. By the way, any injuries? Obviously, we've already talked about one suspension and a player who's no longer going to be here, but anything else going on regarding important players who may or may not be available for whatever reason to start the season?
Are we talking offense or defense or anybody?
Anybody.
Okay, one other name to monitor. Actually, 2 names to monitor. Jackson Kirkland, who's actually 2 defensive linemen. Jackson Kirkland, a transfer from Oklahoma State. They've been kind of careful with him. It's not that he's going to be out long term, but they're just being careful with his health status coming into BYU. And then Luke To'omalatai, who's another defensive tackle. It was a holdover from last year's squad. He had a knee injury in spring camp, and it's TBD on what his status will be going into training camp.
Okay, so both injuries of note are inside on defense, on the defensive line.
Yeah, that I'm aware of, correct.
And at this point in time, that does not mean that either one won't be available. It's just we got to monitor those guys.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's now talk about, I tell you what, let's go into, speaking of talked about some players on the out. Let's talk about maybe some players on the in, including, of course, transfers, recruits. Why don't we start, first of all, with recruiting? Let me pop up. I got the Rivals recruiting list here. They've got, 2 4-star players. Are there any of these recruits coming in, whether it's the 4 stars or 3 stars, whoever they are, who could be an impact or, a contributing player this early this season?
So looking at that list, the one to pay attention to the 4 stars is LaMason Waller. He was an early enrollee, went through spring camp. The wide receiver position at BYU is very stocked and it's deep with talent, but he came in early expecting to make an imprint early on. So I would expect to pay attention to his name. He's a guy that got a lot of skill coming out of Southern California. If he can kind of hone his craft and if the time in the training regimen has paid off, if his body's been transformed, he could be in the mix there. Looking at other names there, the funny thing about this recruiting class, Greg, is a lot of them are mission bound. A lot of guys from BYU will go on missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You don't see them for a full 2, as many as 3 seasons, just depending on when they go on their mission. And the vast majority of these guys on this list were mission bound guys. But 2 other names I will mention that I'm seeing on this list that are going to come in this year. Hunter Clegg is a returned missionary, so he's actually already served his mission time, actually transferred from Utah to BYU, decided to enroll at BYU after his mission. He's going to factor in a defensive end. If he is kind of been able to get his body in shape, he could be a factor at DN. And the other name, Nusi Taumoya Peau, right there, defensive end from Saratoga Springs. He actually plays at the high school, which is about 5 minutes from my house. He is an absolute terror off the edge. He has got elite pass rush ability, and he actually had committed to Stanford, never enrolled as far as I'm aware, but then did a renege on that commitment and decided to sign with BYU, and they're excited to have him in this class. He's got a good size already coming out of the high school ranks and could be one of those third down specialists you just bring in to go off the edge when you have an obvious passing down.
So is he from your neck of the woods?
He is, yeah. He went. So I guess the high school that he went to is literally 5 minutes from where I'm sitting right here. So it's
Okay.
funny. It's a place called Westlake High School.
Okay, so anytime a BYU fan wants to know about recruits, because like you said, some of them will be gone for a couple of years. Like as you mentioned with Clegg, so they're going to basically anytime their missions are up, they're going to put those players right here and add them to this list, to this upcoming list for that year. Is that how they handle it?
Most of them do. Rivals, I know, does it when it comes to their recruiting because they will slot them into the recruiting class they actually enroll at. I'll give you an example. So BYU made headlines just earlier this offseason when they got 5-star quarterback Ryder Lyons to commit to the program. Well, he's going on a mission, and most programs are, even though he's a part of the 2026 recruiting class, so this next recruiting class, in all I guess straight up honesty, he's gonna be a member of the 2027 class when all is said and done. So that's the funny thing about it is, yeah, guys may sign in a certain class, but they don't enroll for a full 2 years if they go on a mission.
Did you say a 5-star quarterback?
Yeah. So Ryder Lyons, remember the 2026 class. This is the 2025 class we're looking at. So he will be a factor down the line, but he is going on a mission, so he's going to be out of the mix for at least a year or so.
Oh, is he a local kid?
Actually not. He's from Folsom, California. Folsom's a pretty strong program in there in Northern California. He does have ties to the university. He's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's obviously the sponsoring church of the institution, speaking of BYU, and decided it's where he wanted to play his college football and beat out the likes of Oregon, USC, and others to get him to Provo.
Yeah, okay, well, that makes sense. Transfers. Mm-hmm. So taking a look here at our depth chart, some of the key transfers that could be making an impact on offense. First of all, do you think that these 4 in orange, do you think that they will all potentially be starting material?
Yeah, Tiger Blackmeyer absolutely in the mix there at that X receiver position. I think that he's absolutely got a chance. He had a really, really big season 2 years ago for Stanford, was an All-American freshman type player. I think he's got a big opportunity. Kyle Saforchich there at right guard, absolutely. Andrew Gentry, I think might be the most important offensive line transfer they got because they hope that he can hold down one of the tackle spots. And he's got a championship pedigree. He has a national championship ring with Michigan before transferring to BYU. So they hope that he brings that to the program. But the biggest of the 4, in my opinion, is the 4th one right there, Carson Ryan at tight end. He had an absolutely dominant spring. I thought he was a really, really good addition at that tight end position, and it's a position group that BYU needs more production from. He expects to have a really big year in his lone season as a Cougar, and BYU hopes he does just that.
Okay, and then on defense, let's see. There's a couple of guys up front as well. Tuiavasa, is he the one that really stands out?
Yes, yeah, he is. He actually, BYU took him. He's already a captain. They took him to Big 12 media days, made headlines, obviously, being a standout player for Utah and then transferring to BYU. That just doesn't happen in this rivalry. I had fans on both sides bickering back and forth on social media, as you might imagine. But he is as good as they believe he can be, and they think he's an NFL-type talent. So they expect him to have a big year. I mentioned Kirkland. They're just monitoring his health status going into the season, but if he is full go, he was a very, very good and solid player for Oklahoma State, and they hope that he will have an impact. But I'll also throw in the name Tausili Akana that you mentioned there. You got him as third string at that defensive end spot. He's a little bit skinny. He's a transfer from Texas. He actually played high school football here in the state of Utah, went to Texas, now is transferred back to BYU. If he can put on some weight, maybe gets to 240 pounds, he could be a really, really nice piece at defensive end. It's just all dependent on him gaining that weight because when he showed up at BYU, I think he's somewhere around 220, 225 pounds, so a little too skinny to really be an impact player right away.
Okay, and anybody else that I did not mention regarding transfers or freshmen who could make an impact?
I think we've got, I think we've covered up pretty much all the guys. Oh, I will mention one other one on the offensive line front. I just saw that as you were scrolling up there. Andrew Williams right there at left tackle. He actually had a really, really strong spring, actually stronger than a lot of people thought. I'm not saying he's going to challenge for starting reps right away, but based on how he performed in spring, he could be a 2-deep guy as a true freshman.
Okay, now let's take a look at the players that are coming back. These are the guys that are really going to make this team work offensively. You look at a kid like LJ Martin at running back, and with the quarterback situation being the way that it is, this could really be a big breakout year for LJ, couldn't it? Because we've seen what he can do, but I mean, we could be at a point where he might be ready for a 1,000-yard season.
That's the hope. He's got to stay healthy, obviously. That was the biggest thing last year. Then SMU game, second game of the year last year, he suffered a high ankle sprain, and it nagged him the entire rest of the season. And he had a pretty good season overall. He had a breakout performance in the bowl game against Colorado because at that point, he was finally fully healthy, having a full month to really recover from that high ankle sprain. But if he is healthy, I really believe he could challenge for 1,000 yards. He was a 4-star prospect when BYU signed him out of El Paso a couple of years ago. And really the only thing that's held him back to this point has been his health status. So if he has a healthy season, I absolutely could see him challenging for 1,000 yards.
And then on the receiver unit, you've already mentioned the transfer tight end, but Roberts is back, which is huge. Phillips, I noticed Phillips had some really interesting numbers for only 10 receptions to be at 21.1 per. Yeah. That means that there's something there possibly if he can get the ball a little bit more. And you mentioned Kingston. Yeah, because Kingston's another one that seems to be a nice little downfield threat or somebody that you get the ball in his hands, anything can happen. Because Marion, I mean, I was actually taken back when I saw that Marion had 2 kickoff return touchdowns and Kingston had 2 punt return touchdowns. Like, come on now. But anyway, I know Marion's gone, but Kingston and Phillips, are they going to end up getting a little bit more production based on the fact that Lassiter's gone?
Yeah. So Chase Roberts obviously will be the number 1 guy. There's no doubt about that. He's poised for a big year, I think, in his final season as a Cougar. But you mentioned the 2 guys I would have mentioned, JoJo Phillips and Parker Kingston. They're going to step into that void, as you mentioned, that was left by Darius Lassiter leaving the program. And the nice part is they also have got a lot of young players beyond that are going to be able to challenge for time. You listed Tate Nakua, Cody Hagan, Dominique McKenzie. Those are 3 legit speed guys that they are excited to have in this program. All of them are young players, were track stars in high school in addition to being standout football players. And the hope is that with the kind of the top 3 of JoJo, Phillips, Chase Roberts, and Parker Kingston, that younger core, they really start to develop and hone their craft, kind of that second unit. And when these guys age out of the program, like Chase Roberts will this year, those guys are ready to step in. But the nice part is they go 3 or 4 deep at every wide receiver position.
You mentioned the offensive line. Do they have a holdover who stands out?
Yeah, Waylon Lapuaho. I think that he is poised to have a monster year this year. He's a left guard. He's played essentially every position other than center at BYU at this point in his career. Played some tackle last year due to some injuries, but his home is at left guard, and he's an absolute mauler at that position. And the other guy I'll mention is kind of a revelation. Last year during spring ball, Bruce Mitchell, he listed center there as the starter. He was a defensive lineman that Jay Hill essentially said, hey, I think you have a better future on the offensive line. He made the transition, and BYU found a home run because he really took the position quite nicely, backed up Connor Pay early on in the season when the Connor Pay broke his foot. Bruce stepped in and essentially didn't miss a beat. And BYU is excited to have him at that center spot and have some continuity there with his experience that he gained last year. And those two, speaking of Lapuaho and Bruce Mitchell, they're going to be kind of the leaders with the rest of the offensive line a little bit in flux.
Okay. And then on defense, take a look there. Who sticks out on, well, the ones that really stick out on defense, I guess, are obvious if you're a BYU guy, and that is Kelly and Glasgow at linebacker. So what kind of ceiling does either of those players have? Because they've sure looked good at this point. And are we going to see even potentially more out of them this season?
They hope to get more out of them. I think both of them have got NFL futures. The crazy thing is they're in some ways scratching the surface of their potential. A guy like Isaiah Glasgow, I'll just tell you this. I cover high school football here in the state of Utah. 5 years ago, he was a 6'4", 180-pound wide receiver / safety in high school. Now he's 6'5", 245-pound linebacker. What a transformation he has made, and he is only getting better as he continues playing the linebacker spot. BYU's got a strong run of linebackers who've succeeded at the NFL level. Fred Warner, Kyle Van Noy, just to name a couple of guys. And it feels like a guy like Isaiah Glasgow is on that trajectory, just right alongside Jack Kelly. Jack's a little bit shorter, but he's got incredible incredible closing speed. And when he gets off the edge, he is an absolute terror. BYU thinks that these two are going to be absolutely elite. But there's another name you list there at that middle linebacker, the max spot, Sialia Serra. Get to know that name. I think BYU is excited to have him. He is 6'3", 250 pound, just an absolute machine out there in the middle of that defense. And they think that 3 linebacker core right there could elevate BYU to some pretty special things, especially losing a guy like Harrison Taggart to the transfer portal.
And with Batty gone and a few other guys, the pass rush, where's it going to come from?
That's a good question. That might be the one biggest question I've got is which of these guys steps up. You list about 7 guys here on this list. I could probably add 2 or 3 more if I were to go and look at the roster. But yeah, Bodie Schoonover, Viliami Apuha, Logan Latui, Ephraim Asiata, Orion Miley Kafusi, Hunter Clegg, who we've already talked about as a freshman transfer coming in here, Tausili Akana. They have to go through training camp, kind of like that quarterback spot, and find the right combination of guys off that edge. I think that BYU's confident that they will find some guys that will emerge. They just need to get them in game-like scenarios and really turn them loose and see who stands out above the rest.
Okay. And what about the secondary? Because I didn't notice any sort of top name guys that were there last year and were gone. It looked like Wall seemed to stick out a little bit. Do they have a secondary that you think is on par with last year? Are they going to be better? How's it looking?
I think it's safety position, I think, will be upgraded from last year just due to the continuity. You mentioned Tanner Wall. I'll give you a little backstory. This is a kid who was a former walk-on with this program as a wide receiver. Couple years into his career, just found no traction at the wide receiver position. Former safeties coach Ed Lamb said, hey, why don't you come over and try safety? And all he's done is become a fringe all-conference performer at that spot. And he's got guys, you list guys like Tommy Prasis as well as Falatau Satuala, who are high-level prospects, 3- and 4-star type talents that they've been unable to unseat him so far through their careers. It just shows how good Tanner Wall has been and what a story he is as a former walk-on with this program. But I think the safety position with him and Raider Demooney are going to be absolutely stellar on that back end. The question mark is at the corner spots. They graduated the 2 starters from last year, so the hope is that 2 guys in Maury Bamba as well as Evan Johnson on the outside, they got a lot of time last year, but they weren't the full-time starters. The hope is with that experience, they'll be able to kind of take that next step and really emerge as the tandem that Gennaro Guilford, as their position coach, hopes they can be. Jonathan Cabea at that nickelback spot, they expect he's going to have a major impact this year. I think they expect that he's going to take that next step and maybe become the next big star in this defensive secondary. But that doesn't even discount Trey Alexander, or Therian Alexander, as you mentioned him here. He goes by Trey. I think that kid has got all the potential in the world. He's 6'3", 180 pounds, long, rangy athlete. And this year could kind of be his coming out party if he can unseat one of those other guys at cornerback.
Okay. Might be a perfect opportunity now to go to breakout performers. Yeah. So why don't we start on defense? Give me a couple of guys that you think could be breakout players, come not necessarily from nowhere, but hey, they bide their time and now this is their year.
Keanu Tanavasa has got to be that guy at BYU's defensive line. It is really going to be as good as they think it's going to be. I know he's an upperclassman, as an all-conference pick at Utah, but I think if BYU expects big things from him, I think he'll absolutely be a breakout player. I already mentioned Sialia Serra. I know that Isaiah Glasker and Jack Kelly are the 2 headliners at linebacker, but Sialia Serra is going to insert his name into that conversation when it comes to the best linebacker if he stays healthy this year. I think he's got that type of talent. And then in the secondary, I will give a shout out to Jonathan Cabea. The coaches have been raving about his progression so far in the program. He's still a really young guy, I believe a true sophomore. Yeah, true sophomore coming into the season. I think he is going to make himself a household name this year with his performance at nickelback.
All right. And then over on offense, give us a couple here.
Here's the thing. We talked about LJ Martin challenging for 1,000 yards. I think the bigger storyline is Sione Aimoa, who's the backup to him at running back. If they can get a two-headed monster at running back that they think they can get out of these two guys, they can have a formidable running game. So I'll give Sione Aimoa some love because I think he could be a guy who could challenge for 300, 400, 500 yards, even alongside a guy like LJ who could go for 1,000. I think he's that good of a running back, kind of playing the Robin to LJ Superman. I will also give a shout out to Isaiah Jota. You listen there at left tackle. BYU's been excited to have him in this program. They redshirted him last year, even though he was technically a senior. I know that sounds really strange, but he had a redshirt year available. They felt like it would do him some good to redshirt, maybe play in 3 or 4 games, and then hopefully emerge this year as their starting left tackle. They expect that he's going to really emerge, and if he does, he could make BYU 5 for their last 5 in terms of their left tackles being drafted in the NFL draft. It'd be a pretty incredible run there. And then I will give one other shout out at the wide receiver position. I really do think JoJo Phillips, you mentioned his numbers, 10 catches, 21 and change per reception. I think with an uptick, maybe see 50 or 60 balls thrown his way, you will see those numbers go up in spades.
Awesome. Let's now take a look at how the team is going to shape up. Opener, it is Pancake City, also known as Cupcake City, with Portland State. The non-conference slate, not that difficult, but you don't know what you're going to get at East Carolina in the 3rd game of the season, so anything is possible there. And Stanford's also going through a coaching change, and former NFL coach. So again, you don't really know what's going on there, but you would expect BYU with this coaching staff and with enough talent that they should be able to win all 3 of those games. And then that sets up the Big 12 opener at Colorado on September the 27th. What do you think about the schedule? I see that Vegas has BYU at 6.5, which I think is actually kind of low. I think this is for a team that was that successful last year. And we know the quarterback's not here. We know that they've lost a few players, but every team loses players. I'm kind of surprised it's only 6.5.
Well, the funny thing about that, Greg, is Vegas actually dropped them a whole game after the Jake Retzloff news came out. They actually only had them at 7.5, which surprised me. I thought with Jake Retzloff, they could challenge maybe 10 wins this year. I think he's probably worth 1 to 2 wins of his own. So I'm looking maybe like an 8-4 campaign, just with the quarterback situation still pending out there. I think if they accomplish that, go 8-4 against this schedule, considering the circumstances, I think it'd be a pretty solid season. Now, would it be the season BYU fans want? Absolutely not, because they were so close to a Big 12 title game appearance a season ago. So they want nothing more than to be in that title game. But I think that first 3 games in some ways is a small blessing to have, as you mentioned, a cupcake non-conference slate, because PSU, speaking of Portland State, Stanford, and East Carolina, even if that quarterback battle isn't settled all the way in training camp, you use those 3 games as kind of a training ground to really see who steps out. And then by the time you get to Colorado late in September, you got to settle on a guy and let them run through the Big 12 conference. Yeah,
and the rest of the schedule, it doesn't really. I mean, there are some games. Obviously, the Utah game is always going to be huge.
So that stretch right there.
Yeah.
From the Utah, at Iowa State, at Texas Tech, and then they finish it up against TCU. That 4-game stretch is the toughest stretch of the season, and that will really go a long way to determining if, okay, was it a good 8-4, or did you capitalize on the other 8 games outside of that 4-game stretch?
Yeah, that definitely looks like the case. But I don't know. To me, it's like they would have to drop a couple of games they're not supposed to drop in order for them, or maybe 3, because every team drops like 1 game they're not supposed to drop. And that's just too much. Not with this staff, not with the returning talent I see, unless there's a rash of injuries or the quarterback situation is just not as good as we thought. And I know we're not saying it's going to be anything fantastic this season, but still, it should be good enough in order with the talent around them that they should be able to produce. But I hear what you're saying. I know. Are the fans at BYU, are they spoiled, or is that just that's just a last year thing, and they just they just want their team to have that type of success they had last year this year again.
Here's the thing. BYU's had a track record over the past 50 plus years, going all the way back to the start of the Edwards era, where they have been used to high flying offenses, coordinators who bring high level offense to the field, and quarterbacks who are absolutely elite. So yeah, if you want to talk about spoiled in that regard, BYU fans have been spoiled for more than half of a century.
Yeah.
And that's what they're hoping to get. Maybe somebody like, if it's McKay Hillstead or Trayson Bourget or Bear Bachmeyer, hopefully you kind of see the early goings of that next elite quarterback at BYU. And yeah, if it results in an 8-4 season, but you have a future star at that quarterback position, I think BYU fans would actually be very content if that were to be the case.
Yeah, if one of these quarterbacks winds up playing even better than Retzlaff, because let's be honest. I mean, he did a good job, but I think it was a little overblown because nobody expected anything.
Correct.
But you look at the numbers overall and even some of the games, and you're like, all right, well, yeah, he was an okay quarterback, but it wasn't like he was, some sort of first-round draft pick that you're letting. It's not Zach Wilson.
Yeah, that's the thing about this. I talk about this when it comes to tiers of BYU quarterbacks. There are good, great, and elite quarterbacks in BYU history. Jake Retzlaff is in the good category, but BYU fans expect great, if not elite, quarterback play, and they've had that with Zach Wilson. They've had with Jaron Hall in recent memory, and you can go back through the past 50 years, the Jim McMahons, the Steve Youngs. They know good quarterback play when they see it, and Jake Retzlaff's numbers are fairly pedestrian. They're hoping to find the next, Zach Wilson, Jaron Hall out of this bunch.
Jake, great job as always. I really appreciate your time. We're going to have links in the description so you can check out your 5-day-a-week podcast, the Locked On Cougars podcast. And is that like same time every day?
Yeah, it comes out every morning. We're on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So yeah, it comes out every morning. It goes out at 7 a.m. Eastern, 5 a.m. Mountain Time.
Okay. Is that live?
It's not live. We pre-tape it, but that's when it goes out on the podcast platforms.
Okay. And what else do you cover? Is it just the football program, or do you cover more than that?
I cover more than that. We do a lot of basketball coverage. Obviously, what BYU basketball accomplished last year.
They've been making a lot of news.
Yeah, they got the #1 recruit in the country,
yeah.
AJ DeBonsa. So a lot of excitement there, but we cover it all. We have a lot of fun with that. And then I do a lot more than that with my sports radio gig during the day here in Salt Lake City as well.
All right, Jake, I appreciate it. And hopefully the team has another fun season and we'll get the opportunity to talk to you again sometime in the next couple of months.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That'd be great. Thanks, Jake. Again, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time here.